Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm so happy to be joined by Jen. Finally, Jen, you made it. You made it on a podcast.
Here.
This has been like a laboring oar. There's been so many podcasts that I've tried to get you on, and you've had scheduling conflicts, and the stars have not aligned, but the stars are in line today, and I'm so happy you're here to join me for this one and many, many more.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here tonight. And I think this is going to be a great one for me to join you for the first time, my inaugural podcast.
Yes, I agree. So today we're joined by Laura Schoefer, and Laura and I have talked for, I think, almost 2 years about trying to get her on the podcast, and just, again, the stars align. This is like a stars aligning podcast. And she was able to come on today. So I'm so happy to have her on. We're going to talk about, all things claims. And, we share a little bit about our shared interests in childhood that you and Laura and I all have in common. So you'll have to tune in to hear. But with that, let's bring her in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Meghan Henry.
Good afternoon, Laura. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm so happy to have you. How are you today?
I'm good, Meghan. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for this opportunity.
I'm so happy I finally got you on, because you and I have had like a long, I wouldn't say tortured discussion, but we've been talking for, I feel like, I don't know, like over a year about coming on a podcast, and I finally got you.
Well, I'm very flattered that I'm a good get. Yes, I think it's actually 2 years in the making. So I was at an insurtech, and you thought that was interesting and reached out to me, but I knew I was in the process of a transition. And so we put a pin in it, and then scheduling whatever. Finally, we popped our heads up, yay. And here we are.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of this. Like, I have to say, there's so many people that I've reached out to in the past that I do hear back from, like, okay, I wasn't ready then, or I worked at a place then that, wasn't keen on me doing these types of things, but now I'm in a place that, like, they love this, or I can talk more about it now, or come on now. And I love that. Like, it's just like planting the seeds, and, people think about it. Maybe it might not be the right time for them at that time, but the time eventually rolls around. So I love that.
Yeah, well, I think they always say that insurance is a relationship business, and I think that's just another manifestation of it, right? Where you make a connection with somebody, it's maybe not the right time, but you build that relationship, and down the road, it's a different conversation.
Yes. So, as you know, because you have been listening to this podcast, this new revamp of my podcast, as well as my prior one, I always like to dig in at the beginning to how my guests got to where they are. And to everyone's, I don't know if people like hearing this or not, but I do. So all the listeners out there, you have to listen to this every single time, because I really like to hear how people got to where they are now. But you're a lawyer by training. You went to law school. And is that something you had intended to do? Was it like you had planned on it during, prior to college or in college, or did you kind of like fall into going to law school?
So I'm one of those rare people who at 8 years old was a really nerdy child, loved to read. And I realized you could go to law school and somebody would pay you to sit at your desk and read and write all day. And that sounded phenomenal to me. So I wasn't one of those children who said, oh, I love to argue, so I want to be a lawyer, or, oh, someone in my family is a lawyer, so I want to be a lawyer. I thought it was a dream job to get paid to read and write all day. And now, many years later, I still feel that way. So it really worked out for me in that way.
So back when you were 8 years old, what were you reading?
Babysitter's Club books.
Oh, me too.
I was really hoping you would say that. My favorite.
So I had every single one, and then I graduated to Sweet Valley High.
Sweet Valley High.
Oh yeah. And then they went to college, and those books got racy, and my parents were trying to move me on. But all the like that genre was my total wheelhouse.
And I feel like that's like missing right now for the kids. Like, and I can't get them. I mean, there's the new rendition of Babysitter's Club, but it's not the same. I think it's like graphic novels or something now. But I remember devouring those books like every day. Like, couldn't get enough. Had to get the next one.
couldn't get enough, right? That like insatiability, I feel like doesn't exist anymore. But also now everything is so instant gratification. It was like a club that you did through school, and you had 3 books come to you every month with like some kind of Babysitters Club swag, like a pencil or a button or whatever. And the day when it came to your house, that was like the best day of the month, right? You were going to get right into that book.
Yes. Oh, I love it. I remember did the same thing as you. It was Babysitters Club, Sweet Valley High, and then Nancy Drew was a big one for me too, until I it for myself, because I'm like, she always solves the mystery. Like, like she's always going to make it out just fine. And then I was like, I don't want to read this anymore. But I was like mentioning it to my daughter, and I was like, oh, maybe you'd like Nancy Drew. She's like, but didn't you say she always solves the mystery? I'm like, oh, damn it. Like, I ruined it. I ruined it for her before she even started.
I think that is so fun, though, when your children start discovering books that you enjoyed. So myself reading, I love to have Madeline read to me. And now I have a daughter who's 4, and she likes the Madeline books. And I just think that is so fun. She has mine from when I was a child, of like the hardcover, all of them together in one volume. And it is so fun to share the love of a book with your child.
And I love those Madeline books. They my daughters were super into those as well. And they even had, like, I think at one point, we're really sidetracking, but I think at one point, I think it was Gymboree had the Madeline clothing series that they had like the dresses and things, and like the black and white dresses with the red collars. You should look. Maybe you could still find them.
I will be looking. We know what I'm doing after the podcast.
But tell me about your like law school experience. Like, when you were in law school, did you have an idea of what area you wanted to explore or what you wanted to do? And how did that path kind of work out for you?
Sure. So I went to undergrad knowing I wanted to be a lawyer. I went to Northeastern, which has a co-op program. So I was so fortunate. I was interning at a large firm at like 19 years old. And so I worked at my big firm the entire time that I was in undergrad, and I did securities class action litigation. And so I went to law school saying, I'm going to be a securities class action lawyer, and I'm going to go work at the big firm that I'd worked at all throughout college, or another similarly situated big firm. And so I really was proceeding on that path. I was in-house doing securities compliance work for one of my co-ops. I also went to Northeastern, which has co-op for law school. I worked at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and then it came time for that 2L summer when you should be at a big firm, and the economy went horribly wrong, and they canceled every single callback interview. And so all of my big firm callbacks just didn't happen, and they really had like no summer class, or certainly not a summer class from Northeastern. I think, a couple Harvard kids, I'm sure, still got it there. And so I really had to pivot, and I graduated law school without a job in a not great economy, and I had to find something to do. And I was really fortunate that I got in doing mass tort environmental work for GE, actually. And it wasn't my dream job, but it was something, and I was employed. And after a year, the kid who had sat next to me went to Resolute, which is a Berkshire Hathaway claims organization. And he said, hey, I think you would enjoy it more. Do you want to come? And so I did, because you'll move for $5,000 when you're in your 20s, right? So I went there kind of on a whim, because he said it was good, and I fell in love with claims. I worked a litigated claims desk, and I thought, this is for me, and I have focused on claims ever since.
And did you ever, having some of that big firm experience that you had during law school, do you ever like regret not having that post law school? You're like, I'm good. I experienced it, and I landed where I need to be.
So a couple years into Resolute, I had that feeling of, I'm a lawyer, but I haven't practiced. If I go to a firm, I'll be able to do so much more. And so I did leave in-house and went to a firm in Boston doing D&O coverage work. And I quickly learned that a third-year associate does not have a glamorous job, and tracking your time is not fun, and not having any say on what you work on or what the strategy is going to be on what you work on was also not fun if you had come up already in a real meritocracy like Berkshire, where I was, working on larger deals and had a decent amount of autonomy. And so they were so gracious towards me. They actually called me back. I was sitting at my desk at the firm one night after 5. My phone rings. My phone never rang because I was a third-year associate. No one was calling me. And it was the president of Resolute. And he said, would I like to come home now? And I thought that was so great. And I was like, yes, please. And I went back as an assistant vice president in their volatile claims unit. And I feel thankful that I had that opportunity, but it really has reassured for me that I love the in-house side. That's where my passion is. And I've stayed loyal to it ever since.
Yeah. I love that. But what I also wanted to comment on too, the Northeastern program though, I think is so great just from a college and law school standpoint. I feel like every law school should have the co-op program, because I think it just prepares lawyers more for actually practicing more so than traditional formatted law schools.
I couldn't agree with you more. So I had the opportunity to work for a judge summer after my first year, like lots of traditional law school environments. I was in-house doing securities compliance work for a publicly traded corporation. I also had the opportunity to do a fellowship where I worked for Oxfam doing work for them, which was unbelievable. So you just have so many different opportunities that you wouldn't have had if you were just stuck to one summer in between second and third year, or just, the 2 summers of law school. It's such a great opportunity. And then in undergrad, I think they've changed it slightly, but I would do 6 months of work at a time. For somebody like me who knew exactly what they wanted to do, it was unbelievable because I felt like I was doing it at 19 years old. But then if you don't know what you want to do, you have all these opportunities to try something out before you're really locked into this is your career or this is your degree. It is such a great program. I can't say enough about Northeastern.
And just a great networking opportunity, which, I was a little blind to networking in college because I was I just want to hang out with my friends and go to school. But it forces you to create a professional network that you might not really be thinking about at that time, but is so important.
Absolutely. And just how to conduct yourself in a professional environment. I was a mother's helper from when I was 11 years old on. So I've always been focused on work and hard work, but being a mother's helper, or I was a camp counselor, I worked at the Gap. That doesn't set you up for a corporate environment, but being in a corporate environment really early on, you can see how it works, how you should conduct yourself. And there are people who I met at the firm who still root for me, who, when I transitioned jobs recently, said, "Oh, I'm so proud of you." That is a network that I have that you would never have otherwise.
Also, I can't help but comment that you were a mother's helper. It had to have been the Babysitters Club that made you want to do that.
It 100% was. So I read the Babysitters Club book, and then I was a Girl Scout, obviously. And so we did a babysitting class at the local hospital. And then because I had my enterprising Babysitters Club attitude, I approached this mom on my street who had just had her 4th baby and said, "Just so you know, I just took this babysitting class. I would love to help you." And she had 4 kids. She was not leaving an 11-year-old with her 4 children, including a newborn. But she would let me go up the street and help her out in the summer. And of course, I thought it was a very serious job. And I just loved it.
I did something so similar. Our town had the same thing. You took this class that you got certified as a babysitter. I don't even know what I learned in it, how to change a diaper and stuff like that. But I did the same thing. I made up flyers. I dropped them in people's mailboxes. And I think my main job was I babysat my cousin when she was a baby, but my aunt was home during it, but she took a nap or just took a rest or whatever. But we just grew. I think we all grew up at the same time. We did all the same things.
I did the exact same thing, and then when I turned 15, I went to work at the Gap. So I think we live parallel lives.
Jen, we should be in touch after this. That's so funny. But this is an aside, but a funny. What did you learn in babysitting class? I learned how to do the Heimlich maneuver. And fast forward to 3rd year law school. It's a sunny Sunday. I'm sitting inside studying for finals, and there's a frantic knock on my door. And I'm like, that's weird. It didn't buzz. Nobody came in. from outside. And so I look, it's the woman who lived next door with her 8 or 9-year-old granddaughter, and the woman is choking. And the granddaughter is terrified, needs assistance for her grandmother. So my babysitting class comes flooding back, and I'm trying to get her into position to Heimlich maneuver her. Unfortunately, she wouldn't let me. She insisted that I hit her from behind. So we don't need to get into all the details, but the woman stopped choking from my first aid, and it all goes back to the babysitting class.
Man, see, because our kids are missing out.
They wouldn't be prepared for that situation.
Although I don't know any parent right now who would allow an 11-year-old just come babysit. It just we're oh, do you have a college degree? You're not qualified to watch my children yet.
100%. So I also have a 15-year-old, and I'm like, is it even appropriate to leave my 15-year-old with my 2 and 4-year-old? In any normal version of reality, yes. But in this world now, you're not even sure. When I think about, I was much younger and alone with non-family members, and it was totally fine.
Yeah. Yes. But I also remember being at babysitting, and the families were always really close to home though too. Mm-hmm. So it was if there were a true emergency, my parents were across the street. There was that level of comfort, I think, that some families had. But of course, this is before cell phones though too. So you needed to have a landline and all of that.
Well, that's the thing. When you would babysit, when we were younger in our babysitting days, the family would go out and there was no way of getting a hold of them. It was just they'll be home when they're home, and your parents will see you when you get home. And that's the whole end of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sometimes they'd leave the number for the restaurant, you were going to call. I guess if there was a major emergency, you would call whatever restaurant asked for the so-and-so family.
Could you imagine being at a restaurant though, and they say oh, is the Smith family here? You're having an emergency. I've never seen that happen. I can't imagine it happening.
Oh no. I'm glad I never had to make that call.
No, my kids and I are watching Young Sheldon right now. We watch an episode every night, and it kind of took place in that same late 80s, early 90s time era. And then my kids will always ask, did that happen back in your day? Back when you were a kid? They think it's the 1920s. Yeah. But it is that same kind, no cell phones, one phone in the house. You drag the phone with the cord into your bedroom to go have a private conversation. It's just so different.
Yeah, and then I think isn't some episode there's a second phone line? Doesn't someone get a second phone line? I think.
And we haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, I don't want to spoil it. We did go. We watched all of Young Sheldon. We did love it in my house too. So anyway, we'll get back on track here. So Laura, you mentioned though that you recently changed roles, and I wanted to make sure we talk a little bit about that, because that in itself, Jen and I honestly recently changed roles in the sense too that we both came over to Cruiser Mitchell in the since November, both of us have joined. But it's a challenge too to come in and you're in a leadership position. So how do you personally navigate that? Because you want to come in with bring some of your own experiences and management models, but then you also want to fit into the general culture of, where you're joining. So how did you manage that for yourself?
I do think it's a tricky balance around trying to align with the new organization, but being authentic to who you are. Billy Smith, who is pretty iconic at NBIS, where I am currently, has said, you have 2 ears, but 1 mouth, and so you should be listening more than you're talking. And I think that that's great advice for anybody early on in a new environment. So I am exactly 30 days in role right now, and what I've done in the past 30 days is made it a priority to get to know everybody in the department. So every single person had a 1-hour meeting with me, and that was a relatively structured conversation where they already knew about me from my intro, but I asked them if they had more questions about me or my background, and then we focused on them, who they are professionally, but also personally. Everybody likes a chance to shine, so them sharing a win with me, and then them sharing what they think the greatest opportunity is in the department, and then what the greatest challenge is, and what they would be doing if they had my job in the first 30, 60, 90 days. And I think that really has helped me establish credibility with my team, where I'm not coming in and saying, it's my way, I know everything. It's okay, I know some things, right? I got to my seat and I feel comfortable that I should be in my seat, but I can also appreciate that there's lots of things that have gone well, and we want to capitalize on those and not backtrack. So everybody likes to feel heard, everybody likes to be valued. So doing a lot of work like that, I think, is really important. I also really tend to focus on culture. I'm a big rah-raher. So we have the team's chat every Friday. I'm going to say, happy Friday, team, or talk about our generation. Yesterday is May 1st, or was May 1st when we're filming this. And so I put the in sync, it's going to be May thing in there. Everybody liked it. Calling out wins really early on, acknowledging progress. I think all of that helps everybody come together as a team. Even though I have benefited hugely from remote working, I live in Massachusetts and my company is headquartered in Atlanta. I do think it's important to get together, especially early days. So pretty soon we will be having a claims on-site where the team can really just have that time together in person. I'm passionate about corporate social responsibility. I think that we're beyond privileged and everybody should be doing it. But I also think it's really humbling and an awesome opportunity to team build. So we'll be doing that together. And I think that will help the team further come together. But work like that, I think, is really important early days.
Was there anything during those initial conversations with your team that like they shared that you were like surprised you, or you're like it was something that you hadn't heard or thought about that you're like, oh, like this is definitely something I'd want to implement, or anything to that extent?
So I was surprised by how candid people wanted to be. You set up the structure and you say this is a safe space and you can say anything you want, but I don't know if I would have been as open and candidly as they have been with me. So I appreciate the candor. It's shocking how much people hold onto and what very little things could be material. So it just is a great reminder to really think about your leadership approach, make sure you're being thoughtful, make sure you're being inclusive, look for opportunities for people to win. Incidents that had happened way before I ever joined, people wanted me to know about. And it's good to have the historical context, but we also have to find ways to let that go and move forward. But keep it in mind so that those kinds of issues don't reemerge.
Yeah. And I think it's so great that you did that, though. And I think it's awesome that your team felt so the ability to be so candid with you. And I think that probably goes to say something about just your general persona. Like they probably immediately felt I feel like I can talk to Laura. I feel like she's someone who can listen to me. And I think that initial meeting, your response to them, kind of affirms their, initial feeling going in. And I think it just starts to foster a positive relationship. Not being there, that's my thought.
Well, thank you. I will take it. I do think of myself as a pragmatist. And so I'm not one to spend a lot of time blaming or figuring out who caused this problem. Wherever we are is where we are. And I'm very solution oriented. So I can't fix the problem if I don't know the problem. And I've made that clear to everybody. As a leader, you don't need the win, right? It's about your team winning. That's the actual win, is seeing all of these people moving forward. So me coming in and saying, I know how to do this claim and showing off my own claim handling expertise, that's not what we need. It's having everybody empowered where they can win and they can show off their own expertise and have the expertise to show off in the first place. So I think setting that out, that my win is their win actually, and I'm looking for all of them to shine. And my job is to get them there, builds trust, makes people feel comfortable, and then they'll start sharing with you what they need to be in that place.
Yeah.
Megan and I spend a lot of time talking about our kids playing youth sports, right? And how important all of that is, the team building and the teaching the kids to cheer on one another and to be there for one another. And it sounds like you're kind of using that same mentality in your team now. And I think it is just so important that we're instilling these values into our kids, because it really does translate into being not only in your example, a good leader, but on your team, good teammates and good team members.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing that I can't stand in the youth sports is when they are like pointing out the things that other teammates are doing wrong. And I'm like, no. We're a team. We're not here to say so-and-so's not doing this or so-and-so did this. Like let's put that stuff to the side because that doesn't further us along here. Like we're working together, not like trying to tear down our teammates.
Right. And you sound like the kind of coach that I would want to be on their team, right? Like your team sounds fantastic, and what you're doing just sounds amazing.
Oh, thank you. We have no openings right now, but if we do,
I have 8 years of claim handling experience. I'm just going to throw that. No, sorry.
We'll talk.
I'll kill her. She's not allowed to go anywhere.
I kid.
Yeah, but she could, I guess. So let's talk about the claims, though. What types of claims are? I mean, I kind of know, but our listening audience doesn't know. But what type of claims do you see now, and how is it different from what you were handling before moving over to NBIS?
Sure. So right now, it's actually a really interesting mix of claims. NBIS does a lot of construction, but heavy equipment claims. So we're talking cranes in a lot of instances, or concrete pumpers. So we have GL coverage, we have commercial auto coverage, we have inland marine. And so you're seeing really interesting claims come out of those coverage lines. The complex GL stuff that comes out of a crane fell over and unfortunately took a person or heavy equipment down with it is familiar to me because I have a complex GL background, but I have also done med mal, professional liability. And so those are not really seen here because it's focused much more on the worksite kind of losses. But good claim handling is good claim handling. Fundamentally, it's really always about conducting a thorough examination, being strategic. There are first party and third party property. So of course there you want to move efficiently is a key focus, but overarching themes ring true no matter what kind of claim you're working on, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, in those types of claims, when you have the large catastrophic losses, or catastrophic claims, I mean, the injury, if there's an injury involved, it's catastrophic. If it's just property damage, it's also likely catastrophic because you have large machinery involved. But it's complex too because it's usually a construction site. There's usually 800 contracts involved and risk transfer, and there's just a lot of moving parts on those types of claims.
Absolutely. And if you're the one who owned or brought $1 million+ piece of machinery to a work site, everybody is automatically going to be thinking that you are the culpable party. And in that way, they're pretty similar to med mal claims that I was working on previously, where I had a lot of hospitals. And so plaintiff's bar would look at the hospital system and say, deep pockets, I want to put culpability on them. And in both contexts, it's about doing your investigation and looking through the contractual risk transfer opportunities and making clear what risk is on your insured, what risk isn't, and then are they liable or not liable, and having the liability appropriately apportioned. Because just because you are the biggest player in an environment doesn't mean that you're the most culpable player, and drawing that distinction and really developing it is a core part of what we do.
Yeah. And that is such a key point though too, because it just, there's a lot of reasons why something may happen, and it isn't necessarily the biggest part, like the biggest piece that is the reason the accident happened.
Absolutely. Especially in accidents like this, it could be something as simplistic as ground conditions, which are kind of happenstance, although also the site owner might have responsibility for, versus inappropriate calculations on how to rig something like that. I mean, it can manifest in so many ways, just like in the hospital setting. Oftentimes the people who are performing a surgery are actually mostly independent contractors. So they might have provided the facility, but they don't have any oversight on how the surgery is conducted. It's like this, you might have provided the crane, but not be directing its movements. And so being very clear about who is responsible for what and who has responsibility for the job overall is important.
So, and in that same line, I mean, are most of your insureds large professional corporations that are more sophisticated, or mom and pop excavating companies that might have 2 pieces of equipment?
So it can run the gamut. We have people who have over 100 pieces of equipment, and then we have people who have 1 crane. And then you really feel for them when their crane goes down, because they're essentially out of business until you can get it operational. And that's something that I'm really passionate about at NBIS, is that service element to claims. We have to be there for our insureds when something like that happens, and we have to get them operational as quickly as possible. So that's newer to me, because I've come from more of a traditional GL background where they're not so reliant on a piece of equipment to move forward or whatever, but building that long-lasting relationship with the insured and providing them with that sense of security is something that I am passionate about and excited about at NBIS.
But that could be such a challenge though too, because litigation can hold a piece of equipment in preservation for years.
And that's the innate tension, right? If you need to perform some kind of testing on it to establish if there was a product defect, let's say, but they need their crane, they need to be moving along. So finding ways to be as efficient as possible and move things along. And then also just have excellent communication so people know what is going on. When can I expect something to move forward? Because I find people can deal with almost anything if you are direct with them and you tell them what the status is. It's when they don't know or they feel unheard that then I think problems arise.
Yeah, and I do think there's also a challenge with these types of organizations, because sometimes the litigation might not be it. Typically, litigation is hopefully not common for them too. So you have to explain the process, and then sometimes you get pushed. Like, even if you're saying like, look, you actually we have to like hold it for right now. There's a preservation hold. There's a litigation hold on it, and there's sometimes like you said, there's tension because like, well, this like I need it, and sometimes it's also difficult to explain. Like I know, but like we kind of have to keep it where it is for this moment. We can try to expedite this as quickly as possible, but unfortunately, when we're faced with litigation and we have a preservation letter, like testing might need to be done. There's all these things that might need to happen. We can't just pull it out and have it repaired for you, and it's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge because you can feel them on their end too. It's really holding up their business flow.
Absolutely. It is a challenge, but you think about the claims environment in the United States right now generally, and challenges like that are present everywhere. I came out of asbestos litigation. That's where I really got up and running. And these are modern day companies that haven't used asbestos in their product in over 50 years, and they're facing potential bankruptcy if they can't get these claims resolved. And, think about the frustration there. They're doing everything they possibly can right now. They feel they didn't know about the dangers of asbestos and haven't even used it since 1970 or something like that. That's incredibly frustrating as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I also think it's funny because I remember when I first started practicing, the firm I worked for, I didn't work on asbestos, but some other people did. I remember people like, oh, it's dying out. And I'm like, that was 15 years ago. I'm like, it's still not dead. It's still happening. It's still going along. Like there's no dying out of this. Maybe, I don't know when it's going to die out, but it hasn't happened yet.
So I have to tell you, I started doing asbestos litigation 1 year out of law school. And I thought, okay, it's a great company, so I'll do it for a little bit, but I'm going to have to transition out of it because I'm young and I won't last my entire career. So I need to be strategic about not being there at the very tail end and needing to retool then. And now I'm very much mid-career and it is still going very strong. I don't know that I had to be so determined to get out of asbestos, but I will tell you, it is a phenomenal claim type. If you really want to learn litigation management and how to put a defense together, you can't do anything better than asbestos claims.
Yeah. Well, they're complex. That is for sure. Yeah. So, obviously you're seeing claims like nationwide. Do you have, and this is a common question I ask a lot of guests, and I should just start taking note of what people say. But as far as jurisdictions, are there certain jurisdictions that come to mind that you are rather unhappy to be in, or ones that cause you more nausea than others? Because I will say I hear a lot of the same ones over and over and over again. So I'm just curious what your input is on it.
Sure. So I love a challenge and I love a difficult case. I don't know that there's anywhere I don't like to be. Obviously, from a risk management perspective, you just know something will maybe easier to resolve or less expensive in certain jurisdictions. So for the loss ratio, of course, I'd like to be there. I will say I'm finding Texas annoying right now with the overuse of Stowers or the ineffective attempts at Stowers. Stowers, for people who maybe are less familiar with Texas, are policy limit demands or time limit demands, and there are certain criteria to make it a true Stowers. And the goal behind a Stowers demand is to put bad faith exposure on the insurer if they don't respond in a meaningful way. But issuing one when you file a lawsuit is not an appropriate use of Stowers. You don't have enough information to evaluate it. And so just putting time pressure on that could actually be spent investigating your claim instead just responding to it is just frustrating. And then I'm a planner. I love to know what's happening when. And so California can be frustrating just because you don't have a judicial assignment and then you get sent out. But then when you finally get sent out to your judge, they say, oh no. And then you go back into a holding pattern. So that is inefficient and expensive. And so that's not enjoyable. But if you work hard and you put up a good defense, I still think that you can have a great result anywhere. I know a lot of people will tell you they hate to be in New York. There is nowhere that's as challenging and as intellectually difficult as New York. So I love it for that. When I got my first defense verdict in New York, I don't know that I had a better professional accomplishment. So I actually enjoy New York.
Yeah, that's how I feel when I win a summary judgment motion in Philadelphia.
Fair.
It's like a framer. I think I've gotten 2 in my lifetime.
Not many people can say that. Good for you.
Yeah. Well, I would say 1 was unopposed, but I still was sweating it out a little bit because there's no guarantees. But throughout your career, though, in litigation management and in claims, have you noticed on your end like a shift or a change in how the approach to litigation management and claims is taken? Like, I think I've seen a change in my career, how at least the attorneys I surround myself with approach defending claims. So I'm curious if you've noticed that on your end as well.
So I think I noticed people trying to adapt to litigation management, but really not knowing how to execute, which leads to further frustration. I am a big believer in having a very streamlined team. And, you have your core partner, you have your core associate, and you have your core paralegal, and then having everybody be very empowered to act in that structure. I think people historically have thought, I am a partner, I have to service my client. And so I will send her very routine emails about scheduling of depositions or things like that. And I have been very vocal that I do not need your expertise and your billing rate to send me information like that. Why can't your paralegal do that? And I think that's been very uncomfortable for some people. But over time, I think you can see more and more of that where people are trying to adapt and only touch the file where it makes sense for them to touch it. And then I think everybody has really tried to improve how they think about the optics of their case. I think when I first was starting out, it was very much like you do your investigation, you try to settle. If you can't settle, just this is what it is, and you're going to try the case. And there were jury consultants, there were things like that, obviously, but now it is so much around, well, how is this person going to present, and how is that person going to present, and just all of the optics of it, which I think adds another layer to it and I find engaging, but I think has emerged more in recent years. As we see nuclear verdicts, people are really trying to combat that and think through how they are occurring and what you can do to stop it.
Yeah, and well, 2 things. I think part of what you're talking about with like the attorneys feeling that they need to like send out the emails and touch the file, I think that a lot of that comes out from like old school mentality though too, that the partner needs to have their hands all in, or client, and also like kind of client control, but like just like showing the client, like, I'm here, I'm there, but you also need to show that you have trust in your team. And like, the partner can't do everything on all the things, and you have to be able to trust your team to be like, okay, I might be overseeing it, but I have to trust that the people I have working with me are going to be able to handle this. Yeah, sure, we're going to talk about things, we're going to talk about strategy, we're going to talk about all the things, but you have to trust who's working with you too.
Absolutely. And I will say, I think that the law firm fee model has to change. I love a flat fee. I hate feeling like somebody's incentivized to overwork the file, or you get an invoice in and it's death by a million cuts, where you see 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, and you think this is not credible. And so when I see partners emailing very routine documents, I think they're trying to support their own billing, and not that they're actually interested in the value proposition of their work. So I couldn't agree with you more. And trust your team, empower your team, and let them send out communications appropriate for their level.
Yeah. And so like here, like we kind of take an approach though too, is that the client kind of defines the win, and whether that might be on a certain file, this needs to be litigated to death and to the dear end and to the courthouse, or is this one that we can be creative and talk up early, and maybe we can resolve pre-suit, maybe we can resolve early suit, and I think kind of what you're talking about kind of goes to that old mentality that it's like, oh, I gotta send out everything, I gotta bill up my 0.1s, I gotta build up the file and do all the things and bring it to the end step, rather than being like, okay, this is how I see this right now. I got this case. You've probably had it longer than I have. This is how I'm seeing it. This is the exit plan I see. And having that initial discussion about that exit plan. Okay, this is our exit plan. These are the steps we're going to take to get us to this exit plan.
I couldn't agree with that more. There's one goal of every, if you want to call it a case in your context, if you want to call it a claim in my context, it's successful resolution, right? And so the sooner you can identify how you're going to get there and articulate it, the better off you are. And I think good work is rewarded with more work, right? And so I think sometimes people want to keep their cases going because it's a billable opportunity, but quickly resolving cases will generate more cases, because people say, oh, Megan and Jen, they always get through those cases. I know I can trust them to handle this matter for me. And so I think people should try to be confident in themselves and their abilities and efficiently move through their inventories.
Yeah. So one thing that often comes up there too, when I speak to carriers, that was with reporting, I think Kevin and I talked about this as well. Kevin, your colleague who was on the podcast not that long ago, is voluminous reporting. And that while voluminous reporting has its time, you don't necessarily need to produce a 15, 16 page report just to show your worth. And I'm just curious to see what your thoughts on it, because obviously your claims are complex, right? There are often a lot of moving parts. There's product issues, there's contractual issues. There sometimes is, or probably more often than not, a lot of things to pull out. But I'm sure you and your team don't want to, page through 16 pages.
Right. And if we're being honest with each other, is anybody reading a 16-page report? I have a lot of suspicions that the answer is probably not in most instances. I think you have to challenge yourself to find ways to communicate efficiently. What is the thing that the adjuster needs to know? Get that in there. And then if there's something that is truly unusual and requires further analysis, great, put that in there. But over analyzing everything, or talking about how joint and several works in California when they have 50 other claims with you in California, is not a good use of your time.
Yeah, it could probably be accomplished by, this case is venued in California where we have joint and several liability. Period.
And then we move right on. I will say the one area where I think people don't do a great job always is their valuation, because I think there's some fear factor there that they don't want to be responsible for an adverse outcome. And so there can be an overstatement of values. And I think everybody really needs to be meticulous, look at actual verdicts in the jurisdiction, ideally with that plaintiff's counsel, and it's okay to take a stand and say, I don't think their witness is credible. I don't think that they will be supported for this reason and that reason. And so my valuation is X. And, will you win the day every single time? No, but actually being thoughtful about it instead of just being a fear monger, I think really builds credibility with your clients and will help you in the long term so much.
Yeah. I will say valuing cases, I think, is an art.
I was going to say that. It's art, not science. Although there are scientific components to it where you really dig into, even as far as people would say, oh, this is like a Whites and Luxembourg case, so top tier plaintiff's firm, so top tier value. But if that firm has their third or fourth tier lawyer on it, you can't possibly say junior associate so-and-so is at the same level as some of these other players. So that's where being really connected and knowing the caliber of your opponent, I think, is really important because it does make a huge difference in the value.
For sure. But also one thing I've noticed a lot in my career is I'll come up with my range, based off of, all of the factors, the jury verdicts, the settlements, all the things, the venue. And then when you talk to colleagues and you get their ranges, it always varies so widely. And then you kind of almost have to take the median sum of them all, though, too, because I like to get values from other people because it's almost like you're polling a jury, because every individual in a jury might put a different number on a case, too. So when you get the values from your colleagues, I think it helps kind of hone in your own range, because my range is based on my things. But when I talk to, so-and-so and so-and-so, and they have slightly different ranges, it's like, okay, let me factor in, how they're seeing this, too, that I might not be seeing so much.
Well, absolutely. You also can really fall in love with a certain fact of your case, or in-house you fall in love with a certain lawyer and you're like, oh, but I know Meghan does a great job, and so of course I can shave off $25,000 or whatever. I agree with you on getting external opinions. One thing that I like to do, I don't think it's necessary in every case, but I will get a Magna report. They have an interesting service where you can get 100 jurors in the jurisdiction to tell you how they would come out on liability and on value. And so if you really have a honest to goodness dispute with plaintiff's counsel where they say it is $2 million all day long and you think it's 500,000 soaking wet, something like that can really help you get a sense of who is closer to accurate. But then my husband is an elevator mechanic, not in this field at all. And I love to ask him, okay, so not any identifying names, but blah, 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 blah. What do you think of the outcome? And he has a great read on where juries will go with cases.
Yeah, I do that the same thing too. With I remember a few years ago, or it was like last year, my brother has no involvement in anything legal or anything, and I ran that across him like the injuries in the case, and my brother was like, wait, like they already got, like, because they got comp. He's like, well, they got paid from work. Like, what do they need anymore? Like, he's like, I don't get it. Case closed. And I was like, well, I mean, helpful, but that's not really helpful. Like, I can't just be like, oh, no, let's not pay anything, because I'm like, clearly that's not going to work. But I'm like, if you were on the jury, he'd be like, nope, sorry. Like, they've already gotten enough. And it's a good outlook to get from people, because we often forget, I think, in this industry that, like, when we try to evaluate the case value, that a jury might just be like, well, they already got paid. Like, I don't see what else needs to happen here, and say, okay, maybe there's liability, but here, award nothing for damages. You never know.
You never know. I know you practice in Philadelphia, which is, of course, a notoriously challenging jurisdiction. I have to share that in the past year, I've overseen 5 trials. 3 of them are in Philadelphia, all 3 defense verdicts. All 5 of them are defense verdicts, but 3 of them in Philadelphia. And so you still can get a good result. You really just have to be meticulous about putting on the right case, of course, queuing into the jury and making sure they're really understanding it. But if there truly was no damage or liability truly isn't established, people should still pursue those cases.
Yeah. And I think you and I talked about this, though, too, is that I think Philly gets this reputation as being a hellhole. And I think there are definite runaway verdicts in Philly, but I think what we often don't talk about is the amount of defense verdicts. And I don't have the most recent numbers, but I remember a year or so ago, someone had pulled the numbers and it was almost 50% defense verdicts in Philly. You just don't hear about them as much because the larger verdicts just get so much more press. And you just hear about that way more than you do about the times that you get a defense verdict.
Absolutely. And I've always thought that is one of the challenges of our side of the V, is that the plaintiff's bar is so organized and has such a great media push behind them. And then here it feels like it's a zero-sum proposition where if you think not you, Meghan, but you in a generalized way, think you have some kind of advantage, you want to keep it to yourself instead of sharing it with the defense community. And that's why we're always kind of behind the plaintiffs in some ways. But we should be saying, hey, I defense this case. You can get a defense verdict. This is what I think worked well for me. This was a challenge, but we were able to overcome it in this way. Because that will decrease values overall if there's a true recognition that defense verdicts are still happening every day.
And like, why isn't the defense bar as organized? Like, I feel like a lot of it has to do with competition between firms for clients, and they just want to advertise your own win, not necessarily a defense bar win.
I think that's right, because I think there is a fear factor of if I hype up that, Riley Jancic, another like Philly firm, got this defense verdict, it will feel like, oh, they're better than me. And it's like, no, I'm saying that this is possible and I'm going to get the same thing for you. And here's how I'm going to do it for you.
Yeah. I don't know. It's almost like, we have to learn a little bit how to help each other out a little bit more and be less fearful of, like client stealing, so to speak. Cause I think it's just like, if you're doing good work for your client, they're going to stay, they're going to stay with you.
Absolutely. I have people who I've been with since I was in my not early, but 20s, doing it straight out of law school. And I still will call them on tricky cases because I know they do great work and I'll be loyal to them for my entire career. Certain names are in my head right now. And so I think, being confident, doing great work, people will be loyal to you and they will always want to support you.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think sometimes people also kind of group the defense firms and the insurance company into one, right? Not realizing that they're two completely separate entities. And it's almost like the plaintiff's bar is up here against both the defense firm and the insurance company. Like, we're the good guy and you guys are the bad guys. And so there needs to be some sort of understanding of the separation and the difference of the relationships between the two of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there needs to be a better appreciation for what a runaway verdict does for the economy overall. It's the equivalent to giving somebody a winning lottery ticket, and that could be at the expense of union jobs in an economically depressed area. I think people don't really think about where is that money actually coming from. It's really easy to tell yourself, oh, insurance, and nobody has limitless insurance, number one. Of course, the listeners know that, but also what about the premiums then? If there are constant overinflated verdicts, then these mom and pop shops or employers in challenged areas won't be able to continue operating. People should think about what is fair compensation and then where is the line.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you this because I asked most of my guests this, but if you like going through what you've gone through in your career and your ups and downs, your new bobs and weaves, like what advice would you give your younger self?
I think just be open to it. I have been very driven for a very, very long time, but success isn't a straight line, and making a lateral move could be great for you. I went from head of claims at my startup, which was a phenomenal experience, to head of claims at a different organization. And, my aspiration has been C-suite. I'm not quite there yet. I'm currently vice president of claims, but each of my leaders have taught me something new and made me better. My last leader in particular, Hillary Jarvis, she has taught me so much and made me the leader that I am now. And so you may not be at the exact title that you want, but you can still be learning and developing. And then also just to be kind to yourself, because it's really a process. And if you keep doing good work that you're proud of, and you treat people in an empathetic, kind way, they will be loyal to you and you will be with them your entire career.
Yeah. I think that's such great advice for anybody, but also for yourself. And one other thing I wanted to ask you though, too, since we started talking about this, about what you're reading, when you were younger, what are you reading now? Because I'm sure you're still an avid reader.
So I am still a reader. I just finished, it's called like The First 90 Days in Role or something like that. It's a Harvard Business Review book, and it's how to be successful as a new leader. This is actually a funny aside. I had interviewed with somebody. We both thought the other person was fantastic, but it just wasn't a right fit for the organization at the time. And he has been kind to me and cheerleaded me for several years now. And so when he heard I was transitioning, he said, you should really read this book. That's where a lot of the learning plan that I talked about in my initial conversations came from. I do a lot of professional development reading. I am a lifelong learner.
I'm reading the adult equivalent of Babysitter Club books. So maybe you're going to have to offer me some suggestions of something a little bit sturdier to read.
I think we should switch, and I should be reading Babysitter Club books.
What is this adult version of Babysitter's Club that
just
you're reading?
Meaning like beach reads, like something that you can kind of easily go through and.
But Laura, I think those books are so good because it's so reflected in just what you're talking about with your initial meetings with your team. Like you're like taking it all in, you're implementing it, and it's clear that it's resonating. So it's time well spent, I think, for you. Even though, it might not be the lightest beach read. Maybe mix in a beach read in a like maybe like go like a 2-for-1. 2 professional development type ones, and then one light beachy.
So a good friend of mine did send me The People You Meet on Vacation. So that is like a very trashy book or light book. And so there is fun in there as well.
So Jen, you've read that one. Is that a good one?
Of course I did. Yes, it was good.
I'm going to add it to my list. Maybe I'll start it tonight. Well, Laura, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you sitting down and taking the time, and just like that we finally got this together after all this time, and that our stars are aligned correctly for the right time. So thank you so much for coming on.
Are you kidding? Thank you so much for having me. It was such a privilege to be here. I appreciate your support of me. It's so exciting to be here. Thank you.
And this was, Jen, isn't this your first podcast too?
This is my first podcast. So
welcome.
Mine too.
Well, great. Well, of course, for everyone listening, if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to Claims Never Sleep. You can find us on your favorite streaming platform. You can also find us on YouTube at Claims Never Sleep Podcast. Thanks for tuning in.